I knew exactly what would happen when I walked into that living room. The balloons, the cake, the forced smiles, all of it orchestrated for my sister Victoria's latest achievement. What they didn't know was that I remembered every detail from my previous life, including how this exact celebration would end with my death. The second time around, I chose to faint instead. You see, the first time I lived through this day, I had been the perfect daughter. 23 years old, fresh from medical school, always putting family first. I had smiled politely when my parents threw Victoria a graduation party for her nursing degree, the same degree I had earned 2 years earlier to significantly less fanfare. I had nodded graciously when they announced she would be joining the family practice that was supposed to be my inheritance. I had even congratulated her when she revealed her engagement to David, my former fiancé who had mysteriously broken up with me 3 months prior. The perfect daughter died of poisoned champagne that very evening. This time, as I stood in the doorway watching my mother adjust the banner that read, "Congratulations, Victoria, our star," I felt remarkably calm. The rage that had consumed my final moments in my first life had crystallized into something far more useful, absolute certainty about what needed to be done. "Rachel, darling, come help me with the table," my mother called, not bothering to look up from her precious arrangements. Patricia Donovan had always been beautiful in that sharp, edged way that made people nervous. Today, she wore her best dress, the blue one I had given her for her birthday last year, though she'd never acknowledged that particular detail. I walked over, noting how my father, Dr. Robert Donovan, sat in his leather chair pretending to read medical journals while actually watching Victoria primp in the hallway mirror. She was adjusting the necklace, that cursed antique necklace that had somehow given her the power to steal my life, my face, my very identity, in ways that defied medical explanation but made perfect sense in hindsight. Victoria had always been the beautiful sister, the charming one, the one who could make people forget I existed simply by walking into a room. But that hadn't been enough for her. She had wanted everything that was mine, down to my bone structure and memories. The necklace, inherited from our grandmother's estate, had somehow made the impossible possible. "The champagne looks lovely," I said, running my fingers along the rim of the glasses my mother had arranged. In my first life, I had drunk from the third glass from the left, the one with the barely perceptible residue that I now knew was a cocktail of drugs, designed to make my death look like a sudden cardiac event. "Doesn't it?" Mother beamed. Victoria specifically requested Dom Perignon. She said this achievement deserved the very best. I almost laughed at the bitter irony. My medical degree had been celebrated with a grocery store cake and a card. Victoria's nursing degree, earned with help I now suspected had been far from legitimate, was being toasted with champagne that cost more than most people's rent. "Where is our star, anyway?" I asked, knowing perfectly well that Victoria was in the hallway, practicing her surprised face for when David arrived. "She's getting ready. You know how she likes everything to be perfect." Dad's voice held the warmth he had never quite managed when speaking about my accomplishments. "We're so proud of her, following in the family tradition of medicine." Following in my footsteps, he meant, though he'd never put it that way. The doorbell rang, and I felt my pulse steady rather than quicken. In my first life, this had been the moment when everything began to unravel. David's arrival, his announcement of their engagement, the toast that would end my life. It had all started with that innocent doorbell chime. "I'll get it," Victoria called, her voice carrying that musical quality that had always made people stop and listen. She swept past me in a cloud of expensive perfume. My expensive perfume, I realised, recognising the scent I had left in the bathroom. David entered like he owned the place, which I suppose he thought he would soon enough. Dr. David Mitchell was handsome in that clean-cut way that made hospital administrators trust him with their most important cases. 31, successful, from a good family, everything my parents had wanted for me. Everything I had thought I wanted for myself. "Mrs. Donovan, Dr. Donovan," he greeted my parents with the perfectly calibrated warmth he had once used with me. "Thank you so much for including me in Victoria's celebration." "Of course, dear," Mother gushed. "You're practically family now." I watched Victoria's face as she waited for her cue. In my first life, this had been when David dropped to one knee, when my world had come crashing down in a shower of congratulations and champagne toasts. This time, I was ready. "Actually," I said, stepping forward with a smile, "I had practiced in the mirror that morning. Before we start celebrating, I should mention that I've been feeling a bit unwell today." The room went quiet. Victoria's eyes flicked to mine with something that might have been alarm. She had been so focused on orchestrating the perfect moment that my deviation from the script clearly unsettled her. "Unwell how?" Dad asked, his medical training kicking in automatically. I pressed my hand to my forehead, allowing a slight tremor to enter my voice. "Dizzy spells, nausea. It started this morning, but it's getting worse." Victoria's laugh was just a touch too bright. "Oh, Rachel, you're probably just tired. You've been working so hard at the clinic." At the clinic where she would replace me, according to the conversation I had overheard in my first life, where Dad had already been laying the groundwork to edge me out in favour of his more charismatic daughter. "Maybe," I agreed, then let my eyes lose focus slightly. "I just feel so—" I allowed my knees to buckle, controlled my fall to avoid injury, and let my eyes flutter closed as I crumpled to the Persian rug. The last thing I saw was Victoria's face, twisted with an emotion that definitely wasn't sisterly concern. The chaos that erupted was exactly what I had expected. Dad shouting medical instructions, Mother crying about her perfect party being ruined, Victoria's voice rising above the din, insisting that this was probably just one of my dramatic episodes. Though I had never had a dramatic episode in my life. "Call an ambulance," Dad commanded, his voice sharp with authority. "Is that really necessary?" Victoria's question cut through the panic. "She's probably just dehydrated. We could drive her to the hospital." In my first life, I would have been touched by her apparent concern. Now, I recognised the calculation behind it. An ambulance would mean paramedics, official documentation, blood tests that might reveal what was happening to me. A private car ride would mean privacy, opportunity, and a chance for any number of accidents to occur. "We're calling an ambulance," Dad said firmly, and I felt a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, he did love me after all. I kept my breathing shallow, my body limp, as the sounds of emergency response echoed around me. Sirens in the distance, growing closer, heavy footsteps on the front porch, professional voices asking questions and taking vitals. "Blood pressure is elevated, heart rate irregular," one of the paramedics reported. "We need to get her to the hospital for a full workup." As they lifted me onto the stretcher, I caught a glimpse of Victoria's face. The concern was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. She was already adapting to this new variable in her plan, already figuring out how to turn my survival to her advantage. But what Victoria didn't know was that I remembered everything. Every lie she had told, every manipulation she had orchestrated, every detail of how she had stolen my life and left me to die. She thought she was dealing with the same trusting sister who had believed her tears and supported her dreams. She had no idea she was now facing someone who had literally nothing left to lose. The ambulance doors closed, cutting off the view of my family's worried faces, though Victoria's worry looked distinctly different from my parents'. As we sped toward the hospital where I had trained, where I had planned to build my career, I allowed myself a small smile. The game had begun again, but this time I knew all the rules, and I had no intention of losing twice. The emergency room at Metropolitan General buzzed with its usual controlled chaos, but I felt strangely peaceful lying on the examination bed. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, my former colleague and the one person who had questioned my sudden death in my first life, was reviewing my charts with the kind of thoroughness that had made her an excellent physician. "Your vitals are stabilizing," she said, her brown eyes studying my face carefully. "But I want to run a comprehensive blood panel. Something about this doesn't feel right." In my previous life, Jennifer had been the one to notice discrepancies in my autopsy report. Questions that had been buried under my family's grief and Victoria's theatrical mourning. She had tried to push for further investigation, but without evidence or support, her concerns had been dismissed as the paranoid theories of a grieving colleague. This time, I was going to give her all the evidence she needed. "Dr. Walsh," I said quietly, making sure we were alone behind the curtain. "I need to tell you something, but you're going to think I'm crazy." She pulled up a chair, her expression shifting to one of concerned attention. "Try me. I've heard stranger things than you might imagine." I took a calculated breath. "Someone is trying to kill me, someone in my family." Her eyebrows rose, but she didn't dismiss the statement immediately. "What makes you think that?" "Because they succeeded once before." The words hung in the air between us. Jennifer's hand stilled on her clipboard, and I could see the clinical part of her mind analysing what I had just said, while her intuitive side recognised something that resonated with her own suppressed suspicions. "Rachel, I need you to explain what you mean by that." So I did. Not the supernatural part. Not yet, but the patterns I remembered, the subtle changes in my family's behaviour, the way David had suddenly cooled toward me, the mysterious circumstances around Victoria's academic achievements. I painted a picture of systematic isolation and manipulation that made clinical sense. "The champagne tonight," I concluded. "I am certain it was poisoned. That's why I fainted. I couldn't risk drinking it again." "Again?" Jennifer's voice was sharp with professional interest. I met her eyes steadily. "You were the one who questioned my autopsy results 6 months ago, weren't you? You found inconsistencies that didn't match a natural cardiac event in someone my age and health?" The colour drained from her face. "How could you possibly know about that? Those records were sealed and I never discussed, because you were right to be suspicious. Because what you found wasn't a heart attack. It was murder." Before she could respond, the curtain was yanked back with more force than necessary. Victoria stood in the opening, her perfect composure slightly cracked around the edges. Behind her, I could see my parents and David clustered in the waiting area, their faces a mixture of concern and impatience. "Oh, thank goodness you're awake." Victoria rushed to my bedside, but I noticed how her eyes flicked to Dr. Walsh and back to me, calculating how much of our conversation she might have overheard. "We were so worried. The party just isn't the same without you." "The party?" Of course. In my first life, the celebration had continued even after my collapse, with everyone assuming I was just being dramatic. They had toasted Victoria's success and David's proposal, while I lay dying in this very hospital. "I'm sure everyone is having a wonderful time," I said carefully. "Actually, we postponed everything until you're better," Victoria said, and I almost believed the sincerity in her voice. Almost. "David insisted on coming to check on you." Dr. Walsh was watching this exchange with the sharp attention of someone who had just been handed a missing puzzle piece. "I'm afraid visiting hours are limited and I need to discuss the test results with my patient privately." "Test results?" Victoria's question came too quickly, too sharp. "But she just fainted. Surely it's nothing serious." "That's what we're trying to determine," Jennifer replied smoothly. "Sometimes what appears to be a simple fainting spell can indicate underlying conditions that require immediate attention." I watched Victoria's face carefully and saw the moment when genuine fear flickered across her features. Not fear for my well-being. Fear of discovery. In my first life, she had been counting on my death being ruled natural causes. An investigation into potential poisoning would unravel everything. I should let Mum and Dad know you're okay, Victoria said, backing toward the curtain. They're beside themselves with worry. After she left, Dr. Walsh immediately pulled the curtain closed and moved closer to my bed. Rachel, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to run every test I can think of, but I need you to be completely honest with me about what you think happened tonight. Someone put something in the champagne, I said without hesitation. Something designed to cause cardiac arrest in a way that would look natural. She was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police. If you're right about this. No. My voice was firm enough to stop her mid-dial. Not yet. They'll question everyone, and Victoria will have alibis and explanations for everything. She's too smart to leave obvious evidence. We need proof. Then what do you suggest? I had been thinking about this for months in my previous life as I lay dying and realised the truth. The necklace she's wearing. It's an antique from our grandmother's estate. There's something about it that's connected to all of this, something that gave her the power to change things. Jennifer's expression grew sceptical. Rachel, I need you to focus on the medical facts here. If someone is trying to poison you, the medical facts are that I died 6 months ago from an unexplained cardiac event, and somehow I'm here now, remembering everything. The medical facts are that my sister has been wearing that necklace since our grandmother's death, and since then, she's been able to manipulate situations in ways that shouldn't be possible. I could see Jennifer struggling between her scientific training and the nagging intuition that had made her question my death in the first place. What kind of manipulation? Academic records that were mysteriously corrected after failing grades. Job interviews where she suddenly became the ideal candidate, despite lacking qualifications. David's sudden change of heart about our relationship. I paused, watching her process this information. Things that could be explained away individually, but together form a pattern. A knock on the cubicle frame interrupted us. A nurse peered in, looking apologetic. Dr. Walsh, there's a gentleman here who says he's the patient's fiancé. He's quite insistent about seeing her. David. Of course he would claim that title, even after our public breakup, even after his engagement to Victoria. Send him in, I said before Jennifer could refuse, but only for a few minutes. David entered with the confident smile that had once made my heart race. Now it only made me nauseous. He was still handsome, still charming, but I could see the calculation behind his warm brown eyes. Sweetheart, he said, reaching for my hand, you scared us all tonight. How are you feeling? I let him take my hand, noting how Dr. Walsh positioned herself where she could observe our interaction. Confused, I admitted truthfully. I thought you were engaged to Victoria now. Something flickered across his face, surprised that I was being so direct, perhaps. That's complicated. Victoria and I have been discussing possibilities, but nothing's been decided. Liar. In my first life, he had announced their engagement at the party tonight, right before the poisoned toast. But now that my collapse had disrupted the timeline, he was hedging his bets. I see. I kept my voice neutral. And what about the job at Dad's practice? Victoria mentioned she'd be joining the family business. That's still being discussed too, he said carefully. Your father values both of your contributions. Another lie. The decision had already been made. Victoria would get the position, the practice, and the life that should have been mine. David was just trying to keep me calm until they could figure out how to proceed with their original plan. David, I said softly, do you remember when we first started dating? You said you loved how honest and direct I was, how I never played games. Of course I remember. Good, because I'm going to be very honest with you now. I squeezed his hand gently. I know exactly what you and Victoria are planning. I know about the practice, the engagement, and the champagne. What I don't know yet is whether you're doing this because you love her or because she's making you do it." The mask slipped completely. David's charming smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating that I had never seen in my first life. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The necklace, David. Look at her necklace next time you're with her. Really look at it. And then ask yourself when you first started having feelings for Victoria, because I guarantee it wasn't before she started wearing that thing." I released his hand and leaned back against the pillows, watching him process what I had said. Dr. Walsh was taking notes on everything, her medical mind trying to make sense of what sounded like paranoid delusions, but felt too specific to be mere fantasy. "I think you should go," I said quietly. "Tell Victoria I'll be fine. Tell her the doctors say it was just stress and exhaustion. Tell her there's nothing to worry about." After he left, Jennifer pulled her chair closer to my bed. "Rachel, what aren't you telling me about this necklace?" I closed my eyes, remembering the moment in my first life when everything had clicked into place. The way Victoria's eyes had gleamed when she put it on for the first time. The subtle changes in everyone around her. The way reality itself seemed to bend to accommodate her desires. "Some truths are harder to believe than others," I said finally. "But if you run those blood tests and find traces of something that shouldn't be there, will you help me prove what really happened tonight? If the evidence supports your claims, I'll do whatever it takes to protect you." That was all I needed to hear. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. I had an ally. I had avoided the poisoning, and I had planted seeds of doubt in the minds of the people Victoria needed to trust her. Now came the harder part, exposing the truth about the necklace and making sure that this time justice would be served. The blood test results came back 48 hours later, and Dr. Walsh's face was grim when she entered my hospital room. I had insisted on staying for observation, claiming persistent symptoms that kept the medical staff concerned enough to extend my stay. In reality, I needed time away from my family to plan my next moves. "Rachel," Jennifer said, closing the door behind her and checking to make sure we were alone. "We need to talk. The toxicology report found traces of digoxin and potassium chloride in your system. These substances, in the right combination and dosage, could easily trigger a fatal arrhythmia." I felt a surge of vindication mixed with cold anger. "How much?" "Enough to be lethal if whatever you did to avoid the full dose hadn't worked." She sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed. "Rachel, someone really was trying to kill you. I've already contacted the police, but I wanted to talk to you first about how you want to handle this." "What did you tell them?" "That we have evidence of attempted poisoning, but I haven't mentioned our previous conversation about the other incident." She paused, studying my face. "Are you ready to file a formal complaint?" I was quiet for a moment, considering my options. In my first life, I had trusted the system, believed that truth and justice would prevail. That naive faith had gotten me killed. This time, I needed to be smarter. "Not yet," I said finally. "If we go to the police now, Victoria will claim the champagne was tampered with by someone else. She'll play the grieving sister, horrified that someone would target our family. Without proof that she's the one who actually did it, we'll just put her on guard." "Then, what do you suggest?" "I want to go home. I want to act like everything is normal, like I don't suspect anything. And I want to set a trap." Jennifer looked deeply uncomfortable with this plan. "Rachel, that's incredibly dangerous. If she's already tried once, she'll try again," I finished. "But this time I'll be ready, and this time we'll catch her in the act." 3 hours later, I was discharged with strict instructions to rest and avoid stress. The irony wasn't lost on me as I climbed into my father's Mercedes for the ride home. He had been quiet during the hospital stay, his medical mind no doubt wrestling with the implications of my test results. "The police want to interview everyone who was at the house that night," he said as we pulled out of the hospital parking lot. "They're treating this as a serious criminal investigation." "I'm sure they'll figure out what happened," I replied neutrally, watching his profile for any tells. Dad had always been harder to read than Mother or Victoria, his emotions buried under decades of clinical detachment. "Rachel," he said after a long pause, "is there anything you want to tell me? Anything about that night that you think might be important?" The question could have been innocent concern, or it could have been a probe to see how much I knew. In my first life, I had trusted him completely, never imagining that his favouritism toward Victoria might extend to criminal negligence. Now, I wondered how much he had known about her plans. "I just remember feeling sick," I said carefully. "Everything after that is pretty fuzzy." We drove the rest of the way in silence. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. The party decorations were gone, but the living room still smelled faintly of champagne and Victoria's perfume. Mother rushed to embrace me, her concern seemingly genuine. "Oh, darling, we were so frightened," she said, holding me tightly. "When the doctor called and said someone had tried to poison you, I couldn't believe it. Who would do such a thing?" Victoria appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, her face a perfect mask of sisterly worry. But I noticed how her hand immediately went to the necklace at her throat, an unconscious gesture that told me she was feeling threatened. "I'm just glad you're okay," she said, coming forward to hug me. As her arms wrapped around me, I felt the cold metal of the necklace press against my cheek. For just a moment, the world seemed to shimmer around the edges, and I heard a whisper that might have been my imagination. "Submit, trust, forget." I pulled back quickly, my head suddenly spinning. The necklace was more powerful than I had remembered, its influence subtle but persistent. No wonder everyone around Victoria seemed to lose their critical thinking when she was wearing it. "I'm still feeling a bit weak," I said, using the dizziness as an excuse to create distance between us. "I think I'll rest for a while." "Of course," Victoria said, her eyes never leaving my face. "You should take all the time you need to recover." As I headed toward the stairs, I heard her talking quietly to our parents in the kitchen. I paused just out of sight, straining to listen. "Police asking questions about everyone who had access to the champagne," Victoria was saying. "It's so violating, thinking that someone we trusted could have done this to Rachel." "The detective seemed particularly interested in the guest list," Dad replied. "They want to know exactly who was in the house and when." "Well, it was just family and David," Mother added. "Surely they don't suspect any of us." "Of course not." Victoria's voice was smooth and confident. "But we should all be very careful about what we say. Sometimes innocent statements can be misinterpreted by people looking for someone to blame." I slipped upstairs to my childhood bedroom, my mind racing. Victoria was already working to control the narrative, preparing her family to present a united front. She was betting that blood would be thicker than evidence, that my parents would protect her even if they had doubts. She was probably right. I spent the afternoon going through old photo albums and family documents, looking for anything that might help me understand the necklace's history. Our grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, had been a fascinating woman, a scholar of ancient cultures who had travelled extensively in her youth. The necklace had supposedly come from a dig site in Romania, though the official paperwork was vague about its origins. What I found in my grandmother's journals, hidden in a box under my bed, was far more illuminating. "The artifact chooses its wearer," she had written in her precise handwriting. "It amplifies the darkness already present in the human heart, feeding on envy and greed to grant terrible power. I have seen what it can do, how it corrupts everything it touches. It must never be worn by one who lacks the strength to resist its whispers." The entry was dated 3 years ago, just before her death. Below it, in shakier handwriting, she had added, "I fear Victoria has already felt its call. God help us all if she ever finds it. My blood ran cold as I read those words. Grandmother had known. She had understood the danger and tried to keep the necklace away from Victoria, but somehow, despite her precautions, it had ended up around my sister's neck anyway. I photographed every relevant page with my phone, then carefully returned the journals to their hiding place. This was the evidence I needed to make someone believe the supernatural elements of my story, but it would also paint me as delusional if presented to the wrong people. A soft knock on my door interrupted my planning. "Rachel, it's David. Can I come in?" I hesitated, then opened the door. He looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept since our conversation at the hospital. The confident charm was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "We need to talk," he said quietly, glancing down the hallway to make sure we weren't being overheard. "About what?" "About what you said at the hospital, about the necklace." He stepped into my room and closed the door behind him. "I've been thinking about it, about when things changed between Victoria and me, and you're right. It was right after your grandmother's funeral, when she started wearing that thing." I felt a surge of hope. If David was beginning to see through the necklace's influence, he could be a powerful ally. "Tell me what you remember," I said. It was gradual at first, little things. I'd find myself thinking about her instead of you, making excuses to spend time with her, believing everything she told me without question. He ran his hands through his hair, looking desperate. "But it wasn't real, was it? The feelings, the attraction, none of it was real." "The necklace amplifies what's already there," I said, remembering my grandmother's words. "It didn't create feelings from nothing, but it twisted whatever existed into something stronger, more obsessive." "So I did betray you," he said miserably. "Maybe not entirely of my own free will, but I still chose to act on those feelings." I studied his face, trying to determine whether his remorse was genuine or another manipulation. "David, I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did Victoria ever talk to you about getting rid of me? About taking over my position at the practice?" His silence was answer enough. "She said you were holding me back," he admitted finally. "That your parents were too sentimental to see that I deserved better than their ordinary daughter. She made it sound like she was looking out for my best interests. And you believed her." I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted what she was offering. He looked up at me with haunted eyes. "But I never thought she would try to kill you. I swear to you, Rachel, I had no idea about the poisoning." I believed him, mainly because David had never been smart enough to plan something so sophisticated. He was a follower, not a leader, easily manipulated by anyone clever enough to appeal to his vanity. "David," I said slowly, "if you really want to make amends for what you've done, I might have a way for you to help me stop her." "What do you need me to do?" I smiled, feeling the familiar calm that came with having a plan. "I need you to help me steal that necklace." The trap was about to be set, and this time Victoria would be the one walking into it blind. The plan was elegantly simple. Victoria had a monthly charity gala to attend, one of those high society events where she could network and show off her newfound status as the family's rising star. She would be gone for exactly 4 hours, long enough for David to create a distraction while I searched her room for additional evidence and photographed the necklace's inscriptions for Dr. Walsh to analyse. What I hadn't counted on was Victoria being 3 steps ahead of me. "Going somewhere special tonight?" I asked casually as she descended the stairs in a stunning black evening gown. The necklace glittered against her throat, its antique silver catching the light in ways that seemed almost alive. "The Children's Hospital benefit," she replied, adjusting her wrap. "David's picking me up in 20 minutes. You should come next year, when you're feeling better, of course." The condescension in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. In her mind, I was already relegated to the past tense, a problem that would soon be permanently resolved. "Maybe I will," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. David arrived precisely on time, his face carefully neutral as he exchanged pleasantries with our parents. He was playing his part perfectly, giving no indication that anything had changed between us. As Victoria linked her arm through his, I caught the brief moment when his jaw tightened, the necklace's influence still pulling at him despite his newfound awareness. "Don't wait up," Victoria called as they headed for the door. "These things tend to run late." The moment their car disappeared down the driveway, I put our plan into motion. David would keep Victoria occupied at the gala while I searched her room. But as I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I found our parents waiting for me in the hallway. "We need to talk," Dad said, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "All of us. Now." Something in his tone made my blood run cold. This wasn't the concerned father who had driven me home from the hospital. This was Dr. Robert Donovan, in full clinical mode, the man who had built his reputation on making hard decisions without emotional interference. "About what?" I asked, though I was already calculating escape routes. "About the fact that you've been lying to us," Mother said, her voice sharp with accusation. "About everything." They guided me into Dad's study, where I found Detective Rodriguez waiting with a thick file spread across the mahogany desk. My heart sank as I recognized some of the documents, photocopies of my grandmother's journal pages, surveillance photos of David entering my room, even screenshots of my text messages. "Miss Donovan," Detective Rodriguez said without preamble, "we've been investigating your poisoning claim, and some disturbing inconsistencies have come to light." "Inconsistencies?" Dad stepped forward, his face grave. "The toxicology report you were shown was fabricated. Dr. Walsh has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into her conduct." The room seemed to tilt around me. "That's impossible. I saw the results myself." "What you saw," Detective Rodriguez continued, "was a document that Dr. Walsh created to support a delusion she believed you were experiencing. She's admitted to falsifying the lab report because she was convinced you were in danger and the system had failed you before." I stared at them in shock. Jennifer had risked her career to help me, and now she was being punished for it. But more importantly, if the toxicology report was fake, then I had no proof that anyone had tried to poison me. "The real results," Dad said quietly, "showed nothing more than mild dehydration and stress. Your collapse was exactly what Victoria said it was. Exhaustion. But the champagne was tested by the police," Detective Rodriguez interrupted. "Clean. No trace of any foreign substances." I felt the walls closing in around me. Victoria had been more thorough than I'd given her credit for. She had somehow switched the champagne, eliminated the evidence, and now I looked like a delusional woman making false accusations against her innocent sister. "There's more," Mother said, her voice breaking slightly. "The journal entries you photographed, we had them examined by a handwriting expert. They're forgeries, Rachel. Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless." "Someone planted them in your rooms," Dad added. "Someone who wanted you to believe that your grandmother suspected Victoria of supernatural manipulation." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Victoria hadn't just anticipated my investigation, she had orchestrated it. Every piece of evidence I thought I had found, every ally I thought I had gained, had been carefully arranged to make me look unstable and paranoid. "Where is Victoria really tonight?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Detective Rodriguez consulted his notes. "At the Children's Hospital benefit, with approximately 200 witnesses. Dr. Mitchell confirmed her attendance and provided photographic evidence of their arrival." Of course she had. The perfect alibi, just like everything else in her perfectly crafted web of lies. "Rachel," Dad said gently, "we think you need help. professional help. The stress of medical school, the pressures of living up to family expectations, it's clearly taken a toll on your mental health. You're suggesting I'm having a psychotic break? We're suggesting, Mother said carefully, that you've been under tremendous strain and it's affected your perception of reality. The good news is that with proper treatment, I'm not crazy, I said firmly, though even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if they were true. Had I imagined everything? The memories of my previous life, the supernatural influence of the necklace, even Victoria's malicious intent? Then I heard it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Far too early for Victoria and David to be returning from the gala. Detective Rodriguez's radio crackled to life. Unit 47 to Detective Rodriguez. We have a situation at Metropolitan General. Dr. Jennifer Walsh has been found dead in her office. Apparent suicide, but we need you here immediately. The blood drained from my face. Jennifer was dead. The one person who had believed me, who had tried to help me, was gone. I have to go, Detective Rodriguez said, already moving toward the door. Dr. and Mrs. Donovan, I trust you'll see that your daughter gets the help she needs. After he left, the three of us sat in heavy silence. I could feel my parents' concerned gazes, their certainty that I was mentally ill and dangerous to myself and others. In their minds, Victoria was the innocent victim of her sister's paranoid delusions. The front door opened, and Victoria's laughter echoed through the house. She was home impossibly early, her timing perfect as always. "We're in here," Dad called out. Victoria appeared in the doorway, still radiant in her evening gown. But something was different. The necklace was gone. "How was the benefit?" Mother asked. "Wonderful. We raised over $50,000 for the children's wing." Victoria's eyes found mine, and for just a moment, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Not the warm concern of a loving sister, but the cold satisfaction of a predator who had successfully cornered her prey. "Rachel, you look terrible," she said with perfect false sympathy. "Have you been having more episodes?" Episodes. The word hung in the air like a blade. "Victoria," I said quietly, "where's your necklace?" "Oh, that old thing. I donated it to the auction tonight. Someone bid quite handsomely for it. $5,000 for charity." She smiled sweetly. Grandmother would have been so pleased to know it was helping sick children. The necklace was gone. My evidence was fabricated. My ally was dead. And my family believed I was mentally ill. Victoria had won completely. "I think," Dad said gently, "it would be best if Rachel spent some time at Riverside Psychiatric Facility, just until we can get her stabilised." "No," I said, standing abruptly. "I won't go willingly." "Sweetheart," Victoria said, stepping forward with her arms outstretched, "no one wants to force you. We just want you to get better." As she moved closer, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart stop. Around her wrist, barely visible beneath her evening glove, was a thin silver bracelet. The same intricate metalwork as the necklace, the same malevolent gleam. She hadn't gotten rid of the artifact at all. She had simply moved it to a less obvious location. "You're not Victoria," I whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. "You're something else entirely, aren't you? Something that's been wearing my sister's face." Victoria's smile never wavered, but her eyes went completely black for just an instant. "Now, you're really starting to worry me, Rachel. You're talking about supernatural possession. That's not healthy." But I had seen the truth in that moment of unveiled darkness. Whatever was controlling Victoria wasn't human anymore, if it ever had been. The necklace hadn't just influenced her, it had replaced her entirely. "Mom, Dad," I said urgently, "look at her eyes. Really, look at them." They turned to Victoria, seeing only their beloved daughter's concerned expression. The thing wearing her face was too skilled, its disguise too perfect for them to penetrate. "I think we should call Dr. Brennan," Victoria said sadly. "Rachel, clearly, needs immediate intervention." As she reached for the phone, I made my choice. I couldn't win this battle with evidence or allies or careful planning. Victoria, or whatever she had become, was too clever, too well prepared. But there was one thing she hadn't anticipated. I lunged forward and grabbed her wrist, my fingers closing around the hidden bracelet. The moment I touched the ancient metal, the world exploded into chaos. Memories that weren't mine flooded my consciousness. Centuries of victims, all young women whose lives had been stolen by the creature that fed on envy and ambition. I saw Victoria's final moments, her consciousness being devoured by something ancient and hungry as she put on the necklace for the first time. And I saw something else, a way to fight back. "By the power that binds you," I whispered, speaking words that came from some deep ancestral memory, "I banish you back to the darkness that spawned you." Victoria's scream shattered every window in the house as dark energy erupted from the bracelet. My parents fell to their knees, temporarily blinded by the supernatural light that blazed between us. When the light faded, Victoria was gone. In her place lay a pile of ancient bones and rotting grave clothes, crumbling to dust even as we watched. The real Victoria's voice, weak but unmistakably her own, whispered from the dust, "Thank you." 6 months later, I stood in Dr. Walsh's old office, now mine at Metropolitan General. The official report had blamed Victoria's disappearance on a psychotic break brought on by academic pressure. David had quietly left town, unable to cope with the guilt of his role in the tragedy. My parents had slowly begun to remember their real daughter, the one they had loved before the creature's influence made them favour the imposter. Sometimes, late at night, I could swear I heard something calling to me from the darkness beyond my window. Other artifacts, other hungry spirits, sensing that I now knew how to fight them. I had died once and been reborn to save my sister's soul. Now, it seemed, I had a new purpose entirely. The war between light and darkness was far from over.